Picture this. Two people sitting across from each other at dinner. The conversation is going well. He is charming. She is smiling. From the outside, everything looks perfect. But inside her mind, a quiet alarm has already started to sound. Not because he said anything wrong, not because he did anything offensive, but because of something so subtle, so deeply embedded in her subconscious that she cannot even name it. By the time the dessert menu arrives, she has already decided there will not be a second date. He will spend the next week wondering what went wrong. She will struggle to explain it to her friends, and neither of them will ever identify the real reason. Today, I want to talk about that invisible alarm. I want to talk about the specific psychological pattern that divorced men, good men, successful men, men with genuine intentions, unknowingly trigger on a first date when they re-enter the dating world after a long relationship. I am calling it the divorce alarm. Not because it is something to be ashamed of, but because once you understand how it works, you can stop triggering it completely. Before we go deeper, I want to ask you something direct. If you have been on a first date in the last few years after the end of a long marriage or relationship, and the other person seemed interested at first but then gradually went quiet, drop the word "happened" in the comments below. No story needed, just that one word. Because you are not alone in this, and the responses in this section are going to shape what I cover in the next few videos. Now let me explain what the divorce alarm actually is. When a man ends a long marriage, especially one that lasted 10, 15, or 20 years, something very specific happens to his social identity. He goes from being half of a unit to being entirely alone in a social world that has changed considerably since he last navigated it as a single person. The dating landscape is different. The communication norms are different. The pace and rhythm of how modern connection is built are different. And here is where it gets psychologically interesting. Most men who re-enter dating after divorce do not feel single. They feel displaced. There's a meaningful distinction between those two states. A man who feels single has a clear identity. He is someone who happens to be unattached. A man who feels displaced is carrying the psychological residue of a life that no longer exists. He is navigating the present while still processing the past. And that residue, invisible, unspoken, often completely unconscious, is exactly what the divorce alarm detects. Here is how it shows up on a first date and why it is so difficult to catch in the moment. Imagine a man who has done everything right on paper. He has chosen a good restaurant. He is well dressed. He arrives on time. He asks thoughtful questions. He is genuinely warm and present. But at some point in the evening, usually around the 45-minute mark when the conversation deepens slightly, he makes a small reference. It might be something like, "My ex-wife used to love this kind of food," or "After the divorce, appreciating these kinds of evenings more," or even something more subtle, a slight hesitation before answering a question about his home life, as if he is mentally editing out a version of his life that no longer applies. Each of these moments is small individually, but to the woman sitting across from him, her subconscious registers something important. This man is still actively processing a major chapter. And here's the psychological truth underneath that observation. When a woman detects that a man is still in the middle of grieving or restructuring his identity after a significant relationship, her attachment system does something automatic and self-protective. It creates distance, not because she judges him, not because she is a cold or unfeeling, but because her brain is performing a very old, very instinctive calculation. It is asking, is this person emotionally available for something new? And the signals she is picking up, the references, the hesitations, the subtle comparisons to a previous life, are answering that question with uncertainty. Uncertainty, in the context of early attraction, almost always results in withdrawal. I want to pause here and ask you something that might feel slightly uncomfortable. Think honestly about your last few dates or conversations with someone you were interested in. Did the topic of your previous marriage or long relationship come up within the first 90 minutes? If yes, not because she asked but because you brought it up or it surfaced naturally, type yes in the comments. And if you kept it completely off the table without effort, type easy. I want to understand where most of the people watching this actually are in their process, because the answer changes everything about how I can help you. Now, here is something that most dating advice gets completely wrong about this situation. The common advice is do not talk about your ex. That is technically correct but practically useless, because the divorce alarm is not actually triggered by the words you use. It is triggered by the energy underneath the words. A man can go an entire first date without mentioning his ex wife once and still trigger the alarm, because the unresolved emotional weight is visible in other ways. The way he pauses slightly too long when asked about his weekends, the way his posture shifts when the subject of family or home comes up, the way he describes his current life in terms of contrast to something that came before, even without naming it. These are not character flaws. They are completely natural responses to a major life transition. But on a first date, they communicate something the other person reads as, this man is not yet fully here. And being fully here, emotionally present, forward facing, with a clear and stable sense of who you are right now, is the single most attractive quality a mature man can bring to early dating. Not his income, not his appearance, not how interesting his stories are, his presence. So the question becomes, how do you build that presence when you are genuinely still in the middle of a significant life transition? This is where most advice fails, because it focuses on performance rather than internal state. The goal is not to appear fine. The goal is to actually arrive at a place where your sense of self is no longer defined primarily by what ended. Let me describe what that shift looks and feels like in practice. A man who has genuinely moved through the core of his post-divorce identity work does not pretend his marriage never happened. He simply does not lead with it. His marriage is something that occurred in his life, shaped him, and is now part of his history. It is not the frame through which he currently sees himself. When someone asks about his life, he answers in the present tense. When someone asks about his past, he answers simply and without emotional charge. He can mention that he was married for 15 years with the same tone he might use to mention that he used to live in another city. It is information, not a wound, not a defining identity. That quality, the ability to hold your own history without being consumed by it, is extraordinarily attractive. Not because it signals that he has forgotten or that he is pretending nothing happened, but because it signals that he is a man who processes, integrates, and moves forward. That is not common, and when a woman encounters it, she notices. Now, I want to talk about the second layer of the divorce alarm, because the first layer is about the past. The second layer is about the future, and it is just as powerful. When a man re-enters dating after a long marriage, he often carries an invisible urgency. He is aware that time is passing. He may want a stable relationship again. He may feel the absence of partnership in his daily life quite acutely. All of this is completely understandable, but that urgency, when it is unmanaged, communicates itself on a first date in ways that feel like pressure. Not aggressive pressure, not obvious pressure, quiet pressure, the pressure of a man who needs this to work. It shows up in the way the conversation moves very quickly toward compatibility questions. Are you looking for something serious? Do you want to travel? What does your ideal relationship look like? These are not bad questions. They are actually important questions. But asked within the first 60 minutes of a first meeting, they signal something to the other person's nervous system. They signal that the man across the table is not simply enjoying the evening. He is interviewing, he is evaluating, he is quietly hoping. And when a woman feels she is being evaluated for a role rather than genuinely encountered as a person, she instinctively pulls back. Not because she does not want something real, but because the energy of audition feels transactional rather than connective. Let me show you exactly how this plays out in real conversation, because the difference is subtle but the impact is enormous. Imagine two versions of the same moment. She mentions she loves hiking. She has been doing it for years, and it genuinely lights her up when she talks about it. The urgency response sounds like this. That is amazing. I have always wanted to get back into hiking. Do you think it is something couples should do together? I feel like shared activities are really important in a relationship. I thought he answered her, but he immediately redirected the conversation toward the relationship and toward compatibility. She registered it instantly, even if she could not articulate why. The unhurried response sounds like this: "That is genuinely interesting. Where do you usually go? Are you someone who needs total silence out there, or do you like company?" He is simply curious about her. He is not running a compatibility calculation in real time. He is not trying to figure out whether she fits into the life he's hoping to rebuild. He is just present with the actual person sitting across from him. That difference, and I want you to hold on to this, is not a technique. It is not something you perform by choosing different words. It is the natural result of a man who is genuinely interested in the person in front of him, rather than the role she might play in his future. And here is the deeply counterintuitive part. The man who is least attached to whether the evening leads anywhere is almost always the man the evening leads somewhere for. Because when someone feels genuinely seen and encountered as a person, rather than evaluated as a prospect, they relax. Their guard comes down. The conversation deepens in ways that cannot be manufactured. And at the end of the evening, she goes home thinking about him, not because he impressed her, but because he made her feel like the most interesting person in the room. That is the practical consequence of interest without urgency. Now let me address something that I imagine some of you are thinking right now. This sounds like it requires being completely indifferent to the outcome. Like you have to pretend you do not care whether it goes anywhere. That is not what I am describing. You can care deeply about finding a real connection. You can want a genuine relationship with enormous sincerity. The shift is not in what you want. The shift is in where you are sourcing your sense of stability while you look for it. A man who needs the date to work in order to feel okay is sourcing his stability from outside himself. A man who genuinely enjoys the evening, regardless of outcome, is sourcing his stability from inside himself. The first man is fragile in ways the other person can feel, even when he hides it well. The second man is grounded in ways the other person can feel, even when nothing dramatic is said. That groundedness, stability, is the direct opposite of the divorce alarm. It is, in fact, the thing that deactivates it completely. The contrast, and this is important, is a man who is clearly interested but genuinely unhurried, who asks questions out of curiosity rather than assessment, who ends the evening without needing it to be anything other than what it was. That combination, interest without urgency, is profoundly disarming. It communicates that his life is already full, that he is not waiting to be rescued from solitude by a relationship, that he is choosing connection from a place of wholeness rather than need. And that is an entirely different energy to sit across from. I want to ask you one final honest question before we close today. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 means your identity is still very much defined by what ended, and 10 means you feel completely clear and forward-facing as an individual, where would you honestly place yourself right now? Leave that number in the comments. Just the number. Nothing else needed. Because I want to build the next few videos around exactly where this community actually is, not where I assume you are. I want to leave you with something I have noticed across many conversations with women about this exact topic. The men they remember most warmly from first dates, that did not lead anywhere, are almost never the most impressive ones. They are the ones who seem genuinely comfortable with themselves, not polished, not performing, not trying to present the best possible version of who they once were or who they hope to become. Just present, just honest, just clearly themselves. That quality is not the result of time passing after a divorce. It is the result of something more specific, a quiet internal decision that who you are right now in this chapter, with this history, is enough to walk into a room with. Not because everything worked out, not because the ending was clean or fair, but because you are here and you have something real to offer, and the next chapter belongs entirely to who you are becoming. When a woman sits across from a man who has arrived at that place, she does not feel an alarm. She feels something much rarer. She feels safe enough to be genuinely curious about him. And that is where real connection begins. Now, there is one specific conversation topic that comes up on almost every first date for men over 45, and if handled incorrectly, it deactivates everything we just talked about in under 30 seconds. It is the question about children, not whether you have them, the way you talk about them, the psychological signal that one type of answer sends versus another, and how to navigate that conversation in a way that reveals your character rather than your complications. Something I break down in full detail in the next video. I will see you there.